Hello and welcome back to the Building HVAC Science podcast, where we aim to create better, more knowledgeable HVAC and building performance technicians by helping the two professions better understand each other. This podcast aims to make the customers happy in the homes they live in, the buildings they work in, through the efforts of our listeners, of those technicians and contractors that do the work out there. We like to impart some new knowledge, some different stories, things you may not have heard of. Here's something you might not have heard of. It's called Eden Homes. Today, on this episode, I talk with Josh Koplin, who's co-founder of Eden Homes. We talk about how digital tools are reshaping HVAC sales experience. He's got a really unique journey that he shares with us, from building power plants in Japan, where heat pumps are the mode of heating and cooling there, to co-founding Eden, a company aimed at bringing this transparency and ease to HVAC sales through technology. We talk about how he offers an SaaS, or a software as a service SaaS platform for contractors that acts as a 24/7 digital salesperson, allowing customers, homeowners, to get customized instant quotes based on a simplified online load calculation, local weather data, and rebate matching. Contractors who sign up with them retain full price control. The tools deployed on their websites, helping them capture highly qualified leads. We also talk about some broader trends in consumer behavior, those trends that help shape where Eden Homes is, and trends you'll probably recognize when you listen to what we describe in the podcast. One of the key points here is 80% of purchasing decisions are made before contacting a salesperson. Josh characterizes Eden Homes as a digital salesperson that never sleeps, and he makes sure we understand consumers are doing the research with or without you, so why not be part of the process from the beginning? So let's get in this conversation with Josh Koplin of Eden Homes, talking about how Eden is modernizing the home upgrade journey. Welcome back to Building HVAC Science. I am navigating the controls of this ship alone this week. Eric Kaiser is off on vacation. How dare he? But hey, he deserves it. He's been doing a lot of traveling lately. Today we have a guest, a friend of mine. I'd say a friend because I've known him for well over a year. I think it's going on a year. Josh Koplin. Josh, how are you?
Doing very well. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Great to have you here. Josh, you're up in Seattle. I say up in because I'm down in Pennsylvania, which is a little bit funny there. But you have a business called Eden Home. And that's what we're going to explore today. How you got into that and what you do with that business and what you think it's important for our listeners to know about it. But first, who is Josh and how did you get to this point where we're talking here today?
Absolutely. And it's been a wild ride. So in actually a previous life, I was actually doing something completely different. I was building power plants over in Japan. So talk about doing something completely different from HVAC.
Wow.
But as you probably know, Bill, Japan is the land of heat pumps and mini splits. So if you ever go into their equivalent of a Best Buy, you go to the mini split section and literally you have a whole wall filled with mini splits, every shape, size, everything you can imagine. So very different ecosystem over there, but also having worked over there for about 10 years and said, this stuff is really cool. So as I was doing the quote unquote salaryman thing over there for about 10 years, I was having an eye on HVAC of all things, coming in from more of a, I'd say, energy efficiency angle, saying these things are great. They heat, cool, super efficient. Why aren't there more of these in American homes? And so after spending about 10 or so years over there, said it's about time to move back stateside. And really, I got together with my two co-founders, Yuri and Ben, and we jumped into the HVAC space.
Interesting. So when did you start that up in the U.S.? What year about?
We actually started the business, that was in 2021, I believe. So it's been about 4 years or so that we've been around. The business itself has been through a couple of iterations. Initially, we were actually doing more of the lead generation business for the HVAC space. And then about, I'd say, a year and a half or so into it, we changed around the business model to provide a SaaS service to HVAC contractors. So it was about a year and a half or so of actually building up the product where I was actually selling in-home together with a couple of smaller local contractors in the Seattle area, actually crawling through attics and crawl spaces, measuring out line sets, having those kitchen table conversations. And basically, that was a phenomenal way for me, for the team, to get to know the space and really get that on the ground experience to build out the software that we're currently providing today.
So the software providing today, the SaaS is a software as a service. So does that mean it's a subscription?
Yes, it is a subscription service. And I realize that I just got into it a little bit without actually saying,
It's okay.
yeah, well, what are we actually doing? But essentially, where we came from is we said there's a lot of change that's happened for society and consumers, especially over the past 5, 6 years, thinking about this pre-COVID era and post-COVID era. And so the way that consumers interact with businesses has just changed by leaps and bounds. So if we think about, Bill, I assume you shop on Amazon and do stuff online, right?
Oh, yeah.
Who doesn't these days?
Yeah. It's amazing who doesn't.
Yeah. Now, sure, you can buy toilet paper on Amazon. You can just click to buy, or you can go out and buy a car, whether it's a Tesla or whether it's something on CarMax. Everything from very small purchases to even very sizable purchases like automobiles, all that stuff is going online. And the way that as consumers we interact with businesses has just changed very, very fast. And I would say, especially because of what happened during COVID. And we said, maybe there's an opportunity there. The consumer is changing, but this industry that we're interested in, from an energy efficiency perspective, from a technology perspective, is there something that we can do in this industry that can really be just kind of a win-win for contractors and also homeowners? So I guess the quick version of what we do is that we provide a tool, a software as a service tool, as you said, for HVAC contractors. You can think about it like an online salesperson that never sleeps, or a digital storefront for a HVAC contractor. So something that sits on a website, homeowner can come in, type in their address, does a quick load calc behind the scenes. A couple clicks later, they get initial estimates, good, better, best, fantastic. We're pulling in all the AHRI numbers. We're looking at all the rebates and incentives that apply to those systems. And really, it's a way to provide a similar experience to what, as consumers, we've come to expect via the CarMax experience or the Tesla experience or the Amazon experience, and kind of allow HVAC contractors to provide that same experience, but also a sense of transparency and building trust online, where we are creating that relationship, starting that conversation, and really getting the contractor out to a much better kitchen table conversation.
So it's not the complete sale, and it's more than lead generation. Lead generation with information, maybe with qualifications, and maybe with the consumer's needs being voiced almost immediately. Is that true?
Exactly. What we've seen is, first of all, having spent about a year selling in-home as we were building a tool, there was a very clear delineation in my mind between what needed to happen at the kitchen table, where you are creating that trust and that human connection and really deeply understanding what that homeowner's needs are in order to create that winning proposal and ultimately close that deal. But at the same time, there's so much more research that happens online from the consumer perspective. There's actually a number of statistics out there, but most recently, what I saw was that about 80%, and that's 80% of purchase decisions are made before somebody actually contacts a human, a salesperson. That is huge. And if we go back a couple of years, so go back to maybe even more than a couple of years, go back to maybe like the 2017, 2018 timeframe. So that figure, obviously different numbers are out there, no stat is perfect, but that stat was hovering around maybe the 70% mark. Another question is, well, what happens if we go back 20 years, 25, maybe 30 years before the internet? What exactly was that statistic? I actually don't know the answer, but we can take a guess to it. Bill, what would you say that figure might have been?
What's the time frame again?
Let's call it, well, take your pick. I was going to go somewhere around 95 to 2005, but let's cut it in the middle and call it 2000.
I'm sure it was less than 50, well less than 50.
Yeah. The good news is that there is no right answer because we do not have data.
Right. Okay. Shoo.
So everybody passes.
That's very cool. So why Eden Home for the name of the company?
This is actually a little bit of a play on words. So we came in from the electrification and energy efficiency aspect. So E for electricity, that part is pretty straightforward. But one of my other co-founders, Yuri, she's also from Japan as well. And as it turns out, Den is Japanese for electricity. So we actually stuck those two together. Den, kind of a cozy den in a home as well. So said, that's kind of a fun play on words. So that's actually where that company name came from.
Do you ever get pushback from contractors that says, hey, what are you doing? You're in my space. You're doing something I don't like.
Oh my gosh, I would love to say it never happens.
It does, though.
It does, certainly. Look, what we are talking about is it's different. It's new and it is very different from the way the industry has traditionally operated. So, do we get that pushback? What are you doing? We certainly get that, and we get that all the time. What I will say is that the reception to when we initially launched our product, which was at fundamentally speaking, since we launched the SaaS product, the value that it provides is really fundamentally the same. It is engaging consumers online and building that sense of trust through transparency and creating a much better lead at the end of the day for that particular contractor. That has not changed. I got a whole heck of a lot more over my dead body comments when we were initially rolling this out than in the past 6 months or the past year. So, one of the really interesting things from my perspective has been that as people have seen this change in consumer behavior, and I might call it the pull from the consumer side, that demand pull side of things, then it does seem like that reception has literally been shifting before our eyes. Because I think at the end of the day, when we think about who is it that pays our bills or pays, if you are a contractor, who's the one that at the end of the day pays your bills, it is the homeowner. And so if you are able to really meet the homeowner where they are, then that in turn is a advantage.
So just meant that comment, people that can't see it, can't adjust to it. I'm sure there's a group of ideal customers or ones that are more likely. You seen any patterns or trends with the customers that you do have now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are, in terms of just adopting this philosophy of transparency online, a couple of general trends. So there certainly is a age element to it. There is that younger generation of owner or general manager that maybe grew up more with a smartphone, cell phones in their pocket. You do see that adoption. This one is actually not age related. It is actually industry related, which I find particularly interesting, is that individuals in the HVAC space, whatever their role may be, that have come in from other industries, you do see higher acceptance or rates of adoption for a tool like this. So one of our earliest customers, he's been selling HVAC for, boy, it's been a while now, well over 10 years, I believe. But previous to that, he was actually in the car industry. So this was back when we were just launching our beta, but connected with him and coming from the car industry. When he saw this, he said, oh, yeah, I've definitely seen this happen in the car industry. I was there and I lived it. It only makes sense that other industries will be adopting same or similar trends. There's both the age demographic, but also the what fields you have come from if you are maybe not originally from the HVAC industry too.
Sure. And we're talking about contractors that do work in existing homes, not new construction.
Yes, that is correct.
Eden has nothing to do with new construction. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
So in existing homes, you mentioned, can you delve a little bit into load calcs behind the scenes? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about doing load calculations, I know the industry North Star and gold standard is making sure that you are doing that manual J calculation. But when you're talking about a manual J, it's designed for technicians. It's designed to be done in home. Everything needs to be adjustable. so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the data that we are pulling in and the calculations that we are doing, they very, very closely do resemble a manual J. But the approach that we've taken to this online load calculation is fundamentally different in that we have taken an approach where we're saying it is the homeowner that is actually driving this process. So from that perspective, it ends up being a completely different puzzle to solve because you need to think about what the average homeowner is able to provide in terms of data and information. And if you start asking about insulation R values, then it's game over. Your average homeowner is not going to be able to provide that information. So the approach that we have taken is to say, let's try to keep homeowner input as minimal as possible, try to keep the experience for them as frictionless as possible, but try to make really smart assumptions based off of what we know. So what we've done is to say, okay, if you're a homeowner going through this process, just go ahead and put in your address. And based off of that, then we are going to pull in as much information about the home as we can from MLS records, from public property records. So that would be obviously where is the home located so that we can pull those design temperatures for the heating and cooling loads. But also, how big is the home, number of stories, when was it built or most recently renovated? Do you have a basement? Is it heated or not? Pulling in as much as we can from those public records and then doing essentially a cross-reference exercise behind the scenes with a model of the US building stock. So it's about 500,000 homes. And based on the attributes that we're pulling in, so the size, the number of stories, the year built, all sorts of things that we're pulling in from public records, what's the home within this data set that most closely resembles what we've identified here? Based off of that, let's try to make really targeted smart assumptions for the R values for the walls, the ceiling, what's the foundation looking like, basically then trying to translate that into the building blocks for that heat load calculation.
Does the consumer have the opportunity or the requirement to look at what assumptions you've made? Or is that just all not transparent to them?
From the consumer's perspective, in that respect, we have tended towards more simplicity for the consumer. So you're absolutely correct. There are some homeowners out there, especially if they do like working with their hands, that might be able to provide more of that information. That is very much the tightrope that we walk when we provide a B2B2C product where the ultimate user is the consumer. And one of the interesting things is that the more fields you have, the more things you are asking of a homeowner for at least the majority, then they are much more likely to churn out and end up going somewhere else if it's overload. And that is very much the tightrope that we want to balance of trying to keep the experience as smooth as possible, but also making sure that we are pinpointing the really big variables and basically making sure that homeowners are, for instance, square footage. If you've had an unpermitted addition for 500 square feet, you may want to adjust for that because that will definitely throw things off.
So the leads that you provide for the contractors, I think going back to rebates and incentives, those are all pretty matter of fact. That's data that you can pull in. It's an external variable. They're well known.
Certainly. It's definitely a puzzle in terms of ticking and tying and saying, based on where you are in the utility and the specific AHRI matchup and the CR2s, then it qualifies for this rebate, but not that rebate, or this equipment qualifies, but not this equipment. So, yes, that is a puzzle. But to your point, yes, that is something that if you have that data, then you are able to make those determinations.
It's soluble. How about for the subscribing contractor? Do they get exclusive leads in their area? Are they like you have one and then anybody in a zip code that comes into that area? Or is it something that people go to your site or people go to the contractor site and it's happening with them?
The answer is that it is people going to that contractor site.
Okay. All right. So they own the lead because they provided your service for the customer to do their interest.
Correct. So it is whatever SEO they're doing or marketing, that is basically where that's coming from. So it's their lead, it's their digital storefront, it's their online salesperson. But it is actually interesting that you brought up, are we providing that online quoting experience and then sending leads, or is it the contractor? And interesting because the way that we started the business and built out the tool is that essentially we threw up a bunch of Google ads, drove traffic to our website, partnered with some local contractors, and basically said, okay, we'll send you leads. I'm also going to go out and sell systems for you. And so that is actually how we ended up building the tool. But we also very quickly realized that as great of a learning experience as it was, and it really allowed us to create the tool to be what it is today, it's one where A, it's not the most scalable, but B, we didn't really want to be competing with contractors when we in fact were not. So rather than doing something like that, we said, if it's a tool that homeowners like and it's something that provides value, let's provide that as a tool to as many contractors as would like to utilize it.
So being in a SaaS in the HVAC residential space, you probably learn about or hear about other products. What's your impression of what's happened in the last few years for technology, tech products entering the HVAC space?
It's wild. And Bill, I'm sure that you also have thoughts about that.
It was a leading question. I have an answer in mind, but I wanted to hear your answer.
So I think there are a couple of things. So one is that just the influx of new technology into the HVAC space and into the trade space, like you're talking about literally Rilla and Ciro doing ride-alongs with AI. You have places like Conduit Tech or Amply. You have in-home load calculation with LiDAR. You have a whole suite of CRM tools, proposal tools, AI voice agents. Just the amount of technology coming into the space, I think, first of all, it's phenomenal in terms of just the amount of resources, because we're talking about an industry where traditionally it has been maybe a little bit overlooked by technology companies. And so I think having all those resources and energy coming into the space, I think fantastic. On the flip side, I do also get a sense from contractors that I speak with that there might be maybe a little bit of tech fatigue that might be setting in there. There are so many tools out there, but it really does come down to a question of what is the right tool for my business? Because you can sign up for 10 different tools and they all do their jobs well, or at least they should. But just going for maybe like that shiny object that may not necessarily always behoove that business, because it really comes down to how do you operate your business? What parts feel like they might be a little bit of a bottleneck right now? What are those points where technology can solve? But just throwing technology at something is not going to fundamentally solve the problem. It has to be very targeted, it has to be thoughtful, and also it needs to be right for that particular organization. There's a lot of resources and great tools coming into the space, but at the same time, you also do want to take a step back and say, okay, given where my business is today and what I need, take a deep breath and say, okay, what are the top tools that can really help me with that goal?
Sure. I recently did a webinar with Conduit Tech, by the way. I'm an advisor for them, but we were talking about the adoption of technology, and I related it to my business at True Tech Tools, where we look at all kinds of technology available to run small businesses, especially e-commerce. And what do you do? What do you use? How do you evaluate? I think a lot of what we rely upon, I would say it transfers over, is evidence, evidentiary data, stories. Do you have any of that going?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've got a couple of things going here. So, I would say that at least on just speaking to the Eden side of things. So, if you can take kind of a run of the mill, quote unquote, internet lead, obviously depends on the contractor, it depends on their operations, all that stuff, but you might be talking about maybe a 30% closing rate on average. And what we see is that for leads coming in through the Eden tool, just by virtue of the fact that people have interacted, they've engaged, they've seen prices, they know what they're going to be essentially looking at. Those leads close at a much, much higher rate. So I'd say maybe around 60% up to 70%. So you're talking about essentially a doubling in the closing rate there, which, especially as we think about the need of contractors to get higher quality leads, make sure that you are spending time with those more qualified homeowners, then it is something that certainly provides value there. On the homeowner side, so this is an interesting piece of survey data that we have. So with each of our clients, after somebody submits a request on their instant quote tool to move forward to the next step to set up that home visit, we ask some survey questions. And one of them is, so how helpful was the instant quote tool? And what we found looking at about 500 or so data points is that it was around 83% of customers, so that would be homeowners in this case, they find online pricing to be helpful in their buying journey. And that also, in fact, does align with some stats from the ACHR News, essentially saying that 70% of homeowners are more likely to reach out to a contractor with pricing on their website. So we see all of these pieces coming together. These are certainly taken separately, they're all data points. But when we start aggregating them, we start to see trends and we start to see an emerging story here.
And you have no limitations like on the state or area a contractor could come to you for this service in any of the U.S. states, 50 states?
Yes, that is in fact correct. And I'm glad you said US because Canada is currently on our roadmap.
Sure. I imagine one thing there is going to be the rebates, programs, incentives are going to be different.
Those would be different. I think actually fundamentally, just because the rebate landscape in the US is so fragmented by utility, that part may be a little bit less so. The same piping and infrastructure applies, and we're talking about the same SEER 2 ratings and HSPF2s and stuff like that. It's actually more the data that we need for the building shell, the load calculation side, pulling in the right weather station data. That data side, I think, is essentially what needs to be built out to support Canada. And then, of course, the metric system.
I'm sure we have a few listeners in Canada. If you're ever looking for getting someone to try it out for size, you could probably reach some people through here. So
Would love that.
would that be okay for people to contact you?
100%.
Yeah. So we'll have your website in the show notes. It's e-denhomes.com. It'll be in the show notes. There's a contact form there. I'm sure somebody from Canada, if they're interested in participating in some future effort, they could reach out to you. I can think of one in particular. I won't say his name, but he's the kind of guy that jumps on everything. So,
Oh, that's fantastic.
but going back to, I'm on the homepage of your website. I'm looking at it right here, and it shows two screens from a smartphone, and this is the interface that the consumer would have likely in front of them, and they're going to get their quotes back or a choice of quotes, and there's actual dollars amounts in those quotes, and you do go through and include the tax credits, the instant rebates, other things from your system. It's the work it's doing in the background. How do you arrive at the pricing? Is it something you do in conjunction with the contractor?
Yes. So the pricing is all by that particular contractor. So that is essentially if you're looking at a standard install scope, standard change out, there will be variables like if you need to wrap line set all the way around a house or you need to do significant ductwork modifications, those elements may not be accounted for in that standard pricing. And we have disclaimer language to that effect. But essentially, all of the equipment, all the pricing, the labor rates and labor hours that go into that pricing, the materials, the markup, all of that is coming directly from that contractor. So really the philosophy there is that this is their digital store. And so in terms of the pricing, it needs to reflect what actually will be discussed in home. So trying to give as much control to that as possible.
Sure. It runs the way they run.
Correct.
Which means there has to be a data input phase to onboarding a contractor.
There is. We're able to do it a couple of different ways. Easiest way is if someone would like to provide us with access to their CRM, then we can just go in, grab the price book, ask a couple of questions around to get ourselves oriented, what systems you want to show. And then basically from there, it's off to the races. And then, of course, if people would prefer to provide it in other ways, whether it's exporting it or filling out a spreadsheet, depends on preferences. We're also able to be very flexible there.
Sure. This primarily quotes for system replacement, not for repair work.
Yes, it is for that larger ticket item, that new system or system replacement or add-on. Repairs by virtue of the fact that there's a lot of variability.
Yeah, it's like going to see your doctor.
Exactly.
You can't get a prescription.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Last question, explore an area which we talked before we started recording, AI search for consumers, trends, things that are happening there. What's your insight into that? First, describe what it is so we're all grounded in the same topic, and then take us into your insights.
Yeah, absolutely. So huge changes happening. I guess to first quickly talk about what exactly it is. So traditional search, we all know this. You go to Google, you type something in, keywords, heating contractor in Kirkland, Washington, where I'm from, and then you get your list of results, the standard thing that comes up from Google, whether it's maps, whether it's ads, scroll a little bit down, you get your standard SEO website links. AI search would be if you type that same question into ChatGPT or Perplexity, or in some cases, you type that search into now Google and you get an AI overview. So I would say it is a fundamental shift in the way that we are and also will be consuming information. If we think back, actually, we can go back pretty far. We can think back 30 years, going from the yellow pages. And then you had those yellow page ads, the radio ads, TV ads, print ads. Then suddenly in the 2000s, you have computers, the internet. Honestly, 1999, 2000, 2001, I would say that if you were a small business that had a website, that was revolutionary. But these things, the cycles go fast. And then by the mid 2000s, most places had websites. Google had established its dominance. Everything went to Google search and Google ads. Then you have Facebook come onto the scene, social media, mobile, again, another shift that happens going into the 2010s. And then now it's really kind of another seismic shift in the way of AI search. And Gartner actually has a very interesting and a very, I think, thought-provoking stat out there saying that by 2026, search engine volume, so the traditional search engine volume, is going to drop by 25% because of AI. So you are literally talking about this very seismic shift for how consumers interact with the web, how they gather information. You can think about it as a disruption, but also just a huge opportunity as well, because this is actually a fun experiment you can do. But if you type the same search in to Google, ChatGPT, or Perplexity, so if I were to search heating and cooling contractor in Kirkland, Washington, or it can be and whatever city you're in, the results that you get out of those three different engines are just completely different. So if you think about this world where maybe Google is getting saturated, this is that change that is both disrupting but also creating opportunity as well.
Do you have any insight how those AI responses are created?
One of the actually interesting things about AI is that if you're curious, you can also ask it. And it will tell you the answer. So why did you choose these companies? It's like, well, I chose them based on these criteria. But there are a number of things that can certainly help prepare you for more AI search visibility. There's the whole kind of emerging area of AI SEO, which I know that a number of marketing firms are leaning into. And I do think that is the direction that things are going to be going, where you want to have a website with fast load speeds. You want to make sure that things are marked up in the proper schema. You want to make sure that you have natural, not just dumping keywords into a website, but make sure that you actually have content on there that is relevant to what somebody is searching for and that an AI can pick up on. There's all sorts of that sort of stuff that you can do on the website side. But in terms of lower hanging fruit, when you talk about AI search, it's not just searching websites for keywords and backlinks like Google does. It is looking at number of reviews, it is looking at different directories. So if you do a ChatGPT search, it might go into who's listed on Yelp, who's listed on, I hate to say it, Angie, who comes up on Better Business Bureau, who comes up on a Reddit thread where somebody is talking about a good or bad experience that they had with a local contractor. So it's looking at all these different databases where, as a human, if you were searching for something, you might go to look for information, gathering all of that, and then coming back. So it really becomes, I think, a game of making sure that you are not putting all of your eggs in that Google basket. Google will continue to be super important, super relevant. But at the same time, ChatGPT and Google are not necessarily friends. So you want to make sure that you are making sure that you diversify, but also doing the basics right too. So polishing those business profiles, whether it's Bing or Google, making sure that reviews are coming in and that they're responded to and that they're fresh, and ultimately really trying to put that kitchen table conversation online, because that is the stuff that if it's useful to a human, then it's going to be useful to AI.
Very good response. Thank you. And we did do a podcast with Tersh Blissett, episode 223, published on June 20th. So people want to dive a little bit deeper into this topic of AI. I think Tersh did a nice job, got a lot of nice feedback on that. This is a great conversation. I always start into these thinking like, what are we going to talk about? And then it's like, oops, time's up. So
it goes fast, right?
It does go fast. And I really appreciate you coming on. Nice to see you. I've met you in person a couple times, different events. Oh, speaking of that, you mentioned earlier you've been on podcasts, on webinars. Do you want to talk about any of those? Who are you catching the attention of such that they invite you to podcasts besides me?
Of course. So there have been a couple. Most recently, I was actually doing a webinar with Hardy, where I'm actually having a conversation with a distributor partner of ours, Ken Morgan from Gensco, where we're digging into a little bit more of these AI search trends, digging a little bit more into these consumer trends, and then also the role of rebates and incentives, and also speaking to that a little bit from a distributor's perspective. So that is out on the Hardy website if anybody is interested. And then there have been a few others. Most recently, I think it might have been with Ruth King on her Contractor Sense podcast.
Okay, so you got a lot of options there to learn more about the perspectives that Josh and his team bring. Eden.homes. Thanks, Josh.
Hey, thank you so much, Bill. Great talking to you.
Same here. Thanks again for tuning in to the Building HVAC Science podcast. If you're in the market for any tools or test instruments mentioned in the podcast or just in general, take a look at what my company, True Tech Tools, has to offer. That's TRUTECHTOOLS.com. And you can use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. I want to thank you for listening to and hopefully subscribing to the Building HVAC Science podcast. We hope to keep you updated on happenings in the world of buildings, HVAC, and science. Until next time, take care.